What up, though? The Negro in the New World. The Negro in the New World by Sir Harry H. Johnston. First published in 1910. The Negro in Alabama, or properly, the American Indian or American in Alabama. A lot of my people are from Alabama. They spent a significant amount of time in Alabama. So I feel a strong connection to that soil portion that we call, that is termed Alabama. Even though we all know that the lines on the map are an illusion, and it's only one soil portion between the Pacific and the Atlantic, and that soil portion is termed America. And oh yeah, we here. We was, is, and always will be. In no case did I see any Negro dwelling. In no case, I know y'all tired of me exchanging the word Negro out for American or for American Indian, but I have to. It's impossible to not clear up the misnomer, to not clear up the falsehoods, because for you to know who you is probably one of the most important things you can know. It creates a solid foundation. And if you're a person with no nation or no soil portion that you feel a natural connection to, it leads to myriad obstacles along your journey. In no case did I see any American dwellings, and we have to understand, and you have to understand, that American is not synonymous with Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, Afro-Eurasian, or any foreigner. American is synonymous with the people who are termed African American or Black Americans, or any of the people from what is termed Mexico, Central America, South America, and all the islands. These are the Americas. And the people are the Americans. All others are foreigners. In no case did I see any American dwellings so poor and African in appearance as in some of the country districts of Virginia. The log huts on the borders of the beautiful pine forest were picturesque and not at all slovenly. Their general aspect is sufficiently illustrated by my photographs. Affixed to each dwelling house would be a chimney of clay to serve the kitchen hearth. Occasionally, the interior of the house was rather rough, but the beds were ample, comfortable, and seemed to be spotlessly clean, with most artistic patchwork quilts. They are speaking of the Negroes, or properly the American Indians or Americans. And listen to what they say. But the beds were ample, comfortable, and seemed to be spotlessly clean, with most artistic patchwork quilts. Yes, you made your own quilts. You made your own clothes. You were self-sufficient. This is what comes with soil. See, the planet provides for its inhabitants. Your soil portion, just like the soil portions of foreigners, provide for them, just as they provide for the soil. These large log cabins were surrounded by outbuildings, also of logs, erected for livestock, cows, horses, mules, donkeys, poultry, and pigs. The boundary of the home enclosure was usually marked by a zigzag fence of split pine stems or by strands of barbed wire strung from post to post. In the better class of Negro homestead, in the better class of American homestead, the dwelling house was neatly built of gray planks, the roof of gray shingles, with glass windows, green shutters, and green veranda rails. The house, of course, was mounted on brick piles, a few feet above the ground. It was very rare to see any American, they say Negro, or other dwelling in the States which had not a space between the ground floor and the earth beneath. The front garden of these Negro houses, the front gardens of these American Indian houses, was always fenced off from the road by a plantation. The front garden of these Negro houses, the front garden of these American houses was always fenced off from the road by a plantation, and nearly always divided into flower beds. These, at the time of my visit in November, were still gay with chrysanthemums and bordered by violet plants in full bloom, scenting the air deliciously. The garden might also contain a rough pergola of pea vine and ornamental clumps of tall pampas grass, or of the indigenous erianthus reed. There would almost certainly be wooden beehives, and beyond the flower beds, a kitchen garden containing cabbages, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, gourds, and other vegetables. In the back premises, there was an abundantly furnished poultry yard of fowls, guinea fowls, turkeys, and geese, the latter being licensed wanderers, requiring no supervision. There was sure to be a pigsty, for the pig is a necessary to the Negro farmer. There was sure to be a pigsty, for the pig is as necessary to the American Indian farmer as to the Irish peasant. How many of your people in the census records from the 1800s and even a little earlier were deemed as farmers? I know plenty of mine were. This is what is meant by that designation. Did you know that? What did you think they were? Oh, let me guess. Slaves without a name. Is this right? I think not. There was sure to be a pigsty, for the pig is as necessary to the Negro farmer as to the Irish peasant. Then there would be stables for mules and horses, cow sheds, barns, and stacks of hay, various kinds of fodder. A plantation of cotton. A plantation of cotton might extend for 10 to 100 acres around the homestead. A plantation of cotton. Who gonna pick the cotton, man? If you got a plantation of cotton, who gonna pick it? You and your children, right? Who? You got in your mind that every time you hear the word plantation, every time you hear the word cotton, it means foul play. The only foul was, as it says right here, the only foul play was in the back premises. There was an abundantly furnished poultry yard of fowls, guinea fowls, turkeys, and geese. That's the only foul play on a plantation of cotton might extend for 10 to 100 acres round the homestead, where your family homestead was at. Did you look? Did you even try to find out who your eight great grandparents was, or your 16 second great grandparents? Because maybe one of them had a plantation of cotton that extended for 10 to 100 acres round their homestead. The interior of these houses was almost always neat and clean. Of course it was. All niggas be caring about how they dwelling look and how the clothes on the body look. The propaganda made y'all da-dun-da-dunts. Let's shake it. The interior of these houses, of your family's houses, of your ancestors' houses, the houses that were situated on the plantation, which had cotton that extended for 10 to 100 acres around the homestead. The interior of these houses was almost always neat and clean and divided into at least 2 bedrooms, a hall, a kitchen, and a parlor. The big wooden bedsteads not only had clean linen, but were spread with handsome quilts of gay colors, or happy colors, or vibrant colors. Worked by the mistress of the house, worked by your grandmother, worked by grandma. Some of these patchwork quilts, and they say, as in Liberia, exhibited real artistic talent. Why they had to insert Liberia into this mix where we're talking about Bama? Huh? Indeed. If the women, indeed, if the women of Liberia or Negro America, you dig? If the women of Liberia, it says, or Negro America, or American Indians, or the only people that were, are, and will be, would only make these bedspreads on a large scale, there should be quite a market for them in Europe. See, This is the foreigner. All they want is your stuff. And when I say your stuff, I mean your talent and what your hands can make. Quite a market for them in Europe. A market for what? Would someone from Negro America make the bedspreads on a large scale as a kind gesture to the people of Europe, to the Anglo-Saxons of Europe, to the Caucasians of Europe? Would they make them as a kind gesture to them? Or would they make them for in return fiat currency? Gold? The same gold that early explorers described as gold dust in the sand when they approached the shore? The same gold dust that your people walked on when they went to the beach? That benefited them and aided them into having optimal health? They design patterns, usually of conventional groups of fruit, foliage, or flowers, and obtain the colors for their designs by cutting out and applying patches of various calicos, cloth, or silks to the quilt. Your people was creative, innovative, and they utilized their talents and their strength. There are usually many pictures on the walls. Chiefly colored prints from newspapers. It was almost invariable to see in these Negro homes, in these American homes all over America, portraits of Booker Washington, Frederick Douglass, and W.E.B. Du Bois, of President Lincoln and Roosevelt, and even of the late King Edward VII and Queen Victoria. In more recent times, MLK, Obama, Malcolm X, right? The last named is a great favorite in American Negro cities or American cities. There are also photographs of Negroes and mulattoes. There are also photographs of American relatives or friends of the household. Did you see that? There are also photographs of Negroes and mulattoes. I told you, it's all about complexion, facial features, hair texture, countenance, and so on and so forth. This has nothing to do with who people were. We know who the people are, who they were, are, and always will be. They're Americans. They're American Indians. They're your people. They're your relatives. Whatever your relatives told you they want to be called, that's who these people were. There are also photographs, just like you got on your wall. Maybe not so much now. I don't know. I'm not in your house, but my grandmother always had a lot of pictures on the wall. And it was of Negroes and mulattoes or Americans, relatives or friends of the household. In several farmhouses, the housewife would show me with pride her china cabinet. How many of y'all grandmamas had a china cabinet in the house? She might have brought them dishes out for the holidays. She might not have brought them out. They was just for show. She kept them dusted, shining, polished. This would be a well-designed piece of furniture fitting into the corner, and here would be stored dinner and breakfast services in china or earthenware, together with a certain quantity of real or imitation cut glass. Indeed, the furniture of these dwellings was often surprisingly good, as it is throughout America, a fact that never seems to me to have been sufficiently noted by British travelers. The illumination of these country dwellings of the Americans, or they say the Negroes, was usually petroleum lamps with candles in addition. But the poorest people sometimes use nothing but rough lamps or saucers apparently filled with some form of turpentine obtained from the pines. Resourceful people they are. Are you resourceful? What is the extent of your resourcefulness? Is it just recording yourself doing something silly? Besides a large family Bible, there might be quite a number of other books, some of which were manuals dealing with the cultivation of cotton or maize or the fertilization of soils. Usually both husband and wife could read, write, and keep accounts. If there was a lack of education, it was generally with the man and not with the woman. The husband might be an absolute Negro. The husband might be an absolute American Indian, and the wife a pale-skinned quadroon, or vice versa. But very often in the best appointed homes, both husband and wife were Negroes, or properly were Americans without any white intermixture. If there was a lack of education, it was generally with the man and not with the woman. The husband might be an absolute Indian and the wife a pale-skinned Indian. But very often in the best appointed homes, both husband and wife were Negroes. Both husband and wife were Americans without any white intermixture. The children of the home were not at school, assisted. The children of the home, when not at school, assisted their parents in the management of the small estate. Most of the farmers I visited had a substantial sum in the local bank. Y'all need to check that out. It might be still there. With interest. Some of them had a large tract of magnificent pine forest as their forehold property, and part of their estate, perhaps as much as 300 acres. This would be enclosed with a neat fence of barbed wire to keep out strollers. Who might by carelessness start a forest fire. In some places, the forest was being cut down extravagantly to obtain a little ready money by the state of the timber. But Tuskegee ideas of forestry were making way, and in addition, much excellent tuition as to the conservation of forest, the judicious thinning and replanting was being given by instructors sent out from the American Board of Agriculture, or the United States Board of Agriculture, we should call it properly, which has its headquarters at Washington. Or, let's just stay with the American Board of Agriculture. That's what it says. That's what we're going to stay with, because as you know, none of this could have happened without your help. Nevertheless, None of the Negroes with whom, nevertheless, none of the Americans with whom I conversed seem to have acquired as yet any feeling for landscape beauty. Some of them with whom I spoke were quite well enough off for themselves and their descendants not to cut down a patch of forest at all, but to keep those magnificent pines, magnolias, and evergreen oaks for the gratification of their eyes. The beauty of it, you know, the beauty of it. What happened to that? Now, do we sacrifice the beauty of a thing, the beauty of what the planet produces, of what the soil produces? Do we now sacrifice that for the intention of commerce? And in like manner, to appreciate the beautiful wild flowers of the uncultivated tracts, mauve asters, the brilliant yellow goldenrod, the wild roses, the magenta colored berries of the French mulberry, the creamy white tufts of the sagebrush, and the pinkish green foam of the dog fennel. Absolutely magnificent. Truly, there is beauty in the South, the sleepy South, a sense of well-being, a quiet satisfaction with the climate, the food, the temperature, the lovely surroundings, the absence of all external worry, which should go far not only to appease race quarrels, but to make the natives of Alabama, southern Georgia, northern Louisiana sensible of their privileges in being the citizens of such a delightful region, your people. Here, there is just enough of winter, just the sufficient touch of frost in the air between January and March to keep the resident vigorous and to check the excessive growth of vegetation. But as y'all know, with cutting down large portions of the trees, it creates the extremes in weather that we witness today. It eliminates that moisture. It is one of the things that causes y'all to think that y'all nappy headed. Then comes the spring, or should we say properly, the new year, with the riot of loveliness in wild flowers, which must surely touch the heart even of the stolid Negro, or properly American. The summer may be very hot, but it is dry, and there is always the shade of the ineffably beautiful woods, with the magnolias 200 feet high, starred with their huge creamy white flowers, while the aromatic scent of the pines pervades the whole state with a wholesome and pungent perfume. Wow. Wow. Then comes the autumn, the pageant of the American year, when some of the many species of oak turn to tints of crimson, purple, orange, and russet, while others remain a glossy bottle green. When the beeches become lemon yellow and the liquid ambers orange chrome, while the young pines stand out in purest emerald, and their giant parents of 300 feet altitude offer a fine contrast to the glowing red and gold by their foliage. of deep blue-green. There is also the glaucous tint of the sleek palmetto palms, which give an oriental dignity to the underbrush. And this again is varied with the yellow green of the dwarf bamboos, miscalled canes. Here and there, the monotony of the forest is broken by a clump of Erianthus reeds with tall cream-colored blooms. Like fairies flitting through a vast and splendid transformation scene, the birds enliven the forest glades. There are azure and russet bluebirds, scarlet and brown tanagers, crimson scarlet cardinals, and the blue, black, and white American jay. The fields of cotton are gay in spring and summer with the reddish or lemon yellow black-centered flowers. But as I saw them in autumn, they were equally striking, even though their foliage was withered because of their great masses of pure white cotton wool. In the hollows between the cotton plantations, there were stagnant swamps or bayous, though swamp is an ugly name to apply to what is in columnar trees, and their still reflections of vegetable Venice. The water, no doubt, is not really stagnant, but flows slowly toward some outlet through the stems of the giant trees. It was in these stretches of deep water and dense forest that the slaves would hide and often escape detection until the pursuers abandoned their chase. They insert a bit of negativity, a bit of poison in the Kool-Aid, or a bit of poison in the sassafras. Here, in far earlier times, there were deer wading deep into the water and jaguars or pumas lying in wait for them on the fern-tufted limbs of the gnarled water oaks. Besides cotton, the country American Indians of Alabama grow sugarcane or sweet sorghum and crush the cane in a rather primitive mill worked by a mule or sometimes by an up-to-date steam engine with boilers and elaborate machinery. More often than not, the syrup flowing like muddy water from the cane or reed was guided into wooden troughs and then passed through cloth strainers and boiled, so that quickly and in a rough and ready fashion the family obtained an ample supply of syrup for their own yearly use, but not of sufficiently good quality for sale. The Anglo-Saxon or Caucasian or Afro-Eurasian author, like his brethren, are obsessed with commerce. Of course, vegetables are much cultivated in a climate so suited to their growth. Sweet potatoes, maize or corn, pumpkins, and cabbages are taken to market. And in the vicinity of towns, salad vegetables are grown all year round. For a vegetarian, the southern states of North America are a paradise. Soul food. Soil food, right? There are so many no scraps from no slave massa table. We talking soil food, soul food, okay? We already mentioned the pigsty, right? From the rooter to the tutor, right? They got you thinking you eating scrap from masa table. No. Sweet potatoes, maize, pumpkins, and cabbages are taken to market, and in the vicinity of town, salad vegetables are grown all year round. For a vegetarian, the southern states of North America are a paradise. There are so many appetizing, nourishing forms of vegetable food: lentil beans, haricot beans, green corn, cucumbers, pumpkins, rice, chili peppers, eggplants, okras, sweet potatoes, ground nuts, all of them to be met with in these American, or as they say, Negro households, and many of them bringing the water to one's mouth as one thinks reminiscently of how hunger has been stayed by the good things of an American country kitchen, and more often than not prepared by a cook of that Negro race. American country kitchen, and more often than not prepared by a cook of that American Indian race, which seems to have an innate genius for the preparation of food. How often I contrasted in my mind the life of these Negroes. How often I contrasted in my mind the life of these Americans in the southern states with that of our English poor. How often I felt it to be greatly superior in comfort, happiness, and even in intellectuality. For many of these peasant proprietors of Alabama had a greater range of reading or were better supplied with newspapers than is the case with the English peasantry, except in the home counties. And in their dress, they compared equally or favorably with the same class in England in being neatly and becoming clothed. Of course, when the men were engaged in very rough field work, they wore coarse clothes or merely shirts and trousers. But as often as not, they, as do all white workmen throughout the United States, would don a clean blue cotton overall covering trousers and waist. The men wore the rather picturesque southern hat of a black felt with the high crown and the broad brim. The women, the flounced and plaited white or lilac sun bonnets, once characteristic of rural England and still so common and so picturesque in provincial America. When dressed in their best, they were costumed in good taste with well-fitting, smart-looking boots, Panama or squash hats for the men, and neat straw hats for the women. The women's clothes seemed to be well made and neat and free from glaring eccentricities in color or outline. The postal service throughout Alabama is apparently excellent, and most of these Negro farmers and most of these American farmsteads had their own post box for the receipt and dispatch of letters on the high road or by road nearest to the house. Mailboxes. Of course, the keeping of livestock is a very important feature in the life of the agricultural Negroes. Of course, the keeping of livestock is a very important feature in the life of the agricultural American of this and other states, and has of late been remarkably encouraged and benefited by the teaching of Tuskegee. On most of the holdings, there were good milk cows descended from Guernsey or Holstein stock. Many a Negro farmer, many an American Indian farmer kept mares and a jackass for mule breeding. I was surprised at the excellence of the poultry. There were leghorns, buff Orpingtons, Plymouth Rocks, and other good breeds for laying and for the table. Turkeys, of course, were kept on a very large scale. Also, geese and guinea fowl. At intervals of a few miles traveling through Alabama and eastern Georgia, one encounters a neat church of timber raised on brick piles and an equally neat schoolhouse, both of them intended for and entirely maintained by the Negro population or by the American population. These buildings are usually painted white with green roofs. Even if there is a state grant for the school, the church is entirely maintained by Negro subscriptions or by American subscriptions, several churches being usually served by the one itinerant pastor, himself probably a farmer in his spare time. Such of these men as I met seemed intelligent and reasonable, and I was told that the type of religious teacher in Alabama, largely through the influence of Tuskegee, has greatly improved within the last few years. There are the usual revival meetings, and in any case, annual church festivals, which are turned into pleasant picnics by the custom of the American. The whole set of the influence amongst the leading pastors is against religious hysteria, and these camp meetings are said no longer to be characterized by the curious mixture of raving religious ecstasy and sexual laxity, which was no doubt rightly attributed to them a few years ago, and which perhaps still exist among the less civilized Negroes of the eastern states or less civilized American Indians of the eastern states. The teachers in the country schools are invariably women and usually graduates of Tuskegee, of Hampton, of Calhoun, or of some other educational institute mentioned in chapter 17. The schoolhouse is usually bright, clean, and well ventilated, and there was no nasty smell in it from the crowding of children, such as too often characterizes the inferior church or country schools in England. The nigger schools was well ventilated, and there was no nasty smell in it from the crowding of children, such as too often characterizes the inferior church or country schools in England. Don't throw the baby out with the bath water. Let's shake it. The well-kept plastered walls were hung with maps of the most modern and up-to-date character, with good pictures and diagrams. The teachers not only spoke correct English without a marked American accent, You know, the language you speak that you've been told is called Ebonics, and you licked it in the mouth, swallowed it, and all that. It ain't Ebonics. It's American. We speak American. The next time somebody say, "Oh, what's your language? What's the name of your language of your people if you're American Indian?" It's called American. The teachers not only spoke correct English without a marked American accent, but were striving to make the Negro children speak in the same way, but were striving to make the American Indian children speak in the same way. I observed that many of these Negro peasants or peasant proprietors talked among themselves a dialect scarcely to be understood by an Englishman, and the old people, ex-slaves, never used any other form of speech and were difficult of comprehension. But the middle-aged and younger folks could, if they wished, speak a more correct English from the London standpoint than might be met with in the country districts of the remoter parts of Great Britain. Out of a Negro population in the state of Alabama of about 900,000, as they say, this is what they say, there are some 20,000 households, say 100,000 persons engaged in farming on their own account, not as the paid servants of white planters. These agricultural Negroes, these agricultural Americans either own their farms as freehold, own their farms as freehold, rent them from white landowners, or work the farms on the system of half the produce going to the landowner. In the Macon County of Alabama, 421 Negro farmers, 421 American farmers in 1908 owned amongst them as freehold 55,976 acres of land, or more than 1/7 part of the land of the county. Check your records of your family. Do your genealogy. Some of these acres, a lot of these acres, are there and abandoned. Some of the old time colonial mansions of the antebellum period are now owned by Negroes, or mulattoes, are now owned by Americans. In one or two instances, actual descendants of the slaves, actual descendants of the people who worked that soil on the estate which the great house dominated, in one instance pointed out to me the handsome old dwelling with its avenue of live oaks had been purchased from his former white master by the slave boy, grown up to be a prosperous farmer. Do the right thing.